Sorry, it's been a bit since I've made a video. It's been winter here, and a heavy winter, and I have been running, and I don't even want to appear on camera. That's how much I've been going. But I wanted to discuss the Insurrection Act of 1807, which allows the president to deploy the military and basically federalize the National Guard. Now, this law was signed by Thomas Jefferson, who was one of the founding fathers and a signer of the Declaration of Independence. So when you think Thomas Jefferson, you usually think, stronger states' rights, more worried about federalistic overreach, especially when you look at the framework of the country. The founding fathers looked to ancient Rome and Greece as a template for how they would make our country. So one can infer that they would be afraid of another Caesar taking over, which this law kind of allows to happen. It allows the president to essentially deploy the military wherever they see fit. They don't need congressional authorization. With the stroke of a pen, the president now has galvanized the army and directed them to wherever they feel necessary. Now, let's use a quick history of this. Now, law was modified twice. The first modification came by Lincoln. And basically what he does is he federalizes the militia. That way they can fight against the states that they're in. So basically turning the militias into a branch of the federal government. Now, when we think of militias, of course, today we have this image of men and women in their pickup trucks and their AR-15s and AKs and whatever. But back then, you have to remember that the militia was comparable to the military. Basically, the military-grade weapons that were found were also found in the hands of the militia. Unlike today, where we have nuclear submarines and ICBMs. The next modification happened in 1871, and that was post-Civil War, and that was basically to help with the freed black men from becoming victimized by the KKK. Now, it was used later on by Eisenhower, who actually used the Insurrection Act in Little Rock, Arkansas, to help comply with the integration of the schools. Okay. It was also happened again during the LA riots in 1992. Rodney King beating, the cops were found not guilty, the city burned, the Insurrection Act was put in, and basically the National Guard and military were activated, all under control of the federal government, and they brought order to the streets. During this process, a teenager was killed, an unarmed one. That was kind of an issue at the time, of course. Now, the next time it was almost used was during Katrina. The governor of Louisiana at the time, the Hurricane Katrina, during the chaos, the governor was afraid to hand over the power to the Bush administration. They were afraid that the Insurrection Act would be used to undermine their authority. During the chaos of Katrina, they basically set about, and finally they fought back and forth between the state and the federal control. And it seemed that the federal government at the time used a modicum of restraint and let the National Guard, under the control of the state's provision, handle it from there. Okay, now let's fast forward to George Floyd, all the George Floyd protests. Trump is in office, and he threatens to use the Insurrection Act. And this is this is the first time during his first presidency. The next time they threatened to use the Insurrection Act was back in 2025, just recently, over these ICE protests. And, of course, as of right now in Minnesota, in 2026. There's a lot of protests and rioters going on over an activist who was killed. And Trump has threatened to use the Insurrection Act to get the state to comply and whatnot. It is a weapon in the president's tool belt. However, there is no oversight. So it can be kind of scary if the president goes ahead and does authorize the activation of the Insurrection Act and the military. With that, it would create martial law. And I just want to talk about what martial law would look like real quick. You would have checkpoints. You would have a complete suspension of a lot of our Bill of Rights. I'm sure the Second Amendment, you wouldn't be able to carry any weapons. Definitely the Fourth Amendment would be out the window. There would be no prerequisite for probable cause. They could just stop you, see where you're going, maybe even restrict your movement. Our freedom of speech would also be severely tapered, if not completely restricted on some levels. They could say that the language is used to further the tensions, that social media would 100% be limited. There would be no live streams. Content would be monitored, or think of during the COVID, how certain things would get banned and whatnot. Well, imagine how this would be, right? This would definitely have a limitation on that. So there you have it. That is the history of the Insurrection Act. It's from its founding to some of its uses and to the potential likelihood of what it would look like should it be implemented. So anyway, be safe, be knowledgeable, and let's hope that we don't do this. This, like I said, has a very Romanistic feel where one man can basically cross the Rubicon and use the army to do what they want.